Hello, it's been a while since I did a proper book video, so I think it's time. I think it's time to dive into another pile of books and recommend you some of my favorites. And I don't know about you guys, but I have been desperate for spring lately. It's just the month of February. It's too long. It's so gray. Even in Italy, it's so gray and rainy. And I'm just longing for some sun and for spending time outside and just for spring. I want spring. And whenever spring comes around, I find myself gravitating towards a specific genre of books. It's not really a genre, I made it up. But I call the genre books that make you feel like you're spending time in nature. They can be either nonfiction or fiction, but an important thing is that they are heavily focused on nature, humans' connection with nature. And whenever you read them, you just feel like you're outside. You feel the grass under your feet, you feel the sun on your face. I love those kind of books and I always read them throughout spring and summer. They just bring me so much peace and they really inspire me to spend more time outside in general, but also look around more, like really focus on the changes that each season brings. It makes me want to identify plants and flowers, and it really makes me want to grow some of my own, which is also a reason that these books make me a little bit sad in a way because it's become such a privilege, to have access to like a green outdoor space, let alone own a space like that. Like, I dream of a garden of my own. Like, I could write a room of one's own in my version called A Garden of One's Own because I so desperately want outdoor space to spend time in, to grow things, to grow vegetables, and really become more in tune with the seasons and nature cycles this way. And I grew up with a garden. My parents always had gardens when I was a kid. And when you're a kid, you kind of always assume you will have the same sort of life as your parents, like at least as good or maybe even better. But that's just not the case. Like, my parents' generation had it way easier in terms of being able to buy property, being able to have a garden. If you worked hard, it paid off in the sense that you could actually afford things. And that's just not the case anymore. And it's making me a little bit sad because it feels like such a basic thing that humans need, like access to nature. And it's not that natural anymore. It actually costs a lot of money to do that. It's become such like a rich people thing. So I think a garden of my own for me is a long way off. But these books kind of like make up for it in the sense that I can pretend for a while. So I just want to take you through my favorites. And a small disclaimer, I have not fully finished all of these books. And I know that's like an illegal thing to do, to recommend books you have not actually finished. But most of these books you do not need to finish to get like the gist of what they're about and how they make you feel, because they're not all fiction stories. A lot of them are like more slow, ruminating, essay-like nonfiction. And those are the type of books I don't finish in one read. I just pick them up whenever I feel the need to read them. And a lot of them I started last summer, but then summer was over and it just was not the right time anymore to read these books. So like I said, I have not fully finished them, but I have read enough of them to feel confident in recommending them to you. So when I haven't finished them, I will tell you. So let's get into the first book. And that first book is Mother Nature by Derek Jarman. Derek Jarman was a filmmaker, an artist who tested positive for HIV in the 80s, in a time that a lot of gay people tested positive. It became sort of like an epidemic and people were very scared and a lot of people died. And during this time, he decided to buy a cottage by the seaside called Prospect Cottage and just sort of spent his last days gardening there. And this is a diary of that time. As far as I remember, he wrote almost daily in this diary, and it's a mix of literally documenting the process of his garden and how it's coming along, talking about all the flowers and plants he's planting there, what these flowers mean, a little bit of their history. But also he's ruminating about his youth, his time as a young gay man and all the challenges that brought, his life as an artist and his complicated connection to his art, and how he's not really sure anymore if his art is important to him anymore now that he's sick. He's just thinking a lot about life, and specifically his life, now that it's coming to an end. And he's documenting a time that is very peaceful in a sense, but also incredibly sad because he knows he's going to die and a lot of his friends are also passing in this time. So this is a very sad book, but also very beautiful. Like, it talks so beautifully about the peace and the purpose that having a garden and growing things can bring. And this is one of the books I haven't fully finished because it's not necessarily a book that you fly through. You also don't need to keep reading to, understand the plot, but it's a book I come back to every now and then when I long for that melancholic piece of Derek Jarman's garden. The next book I have here is Wild by Cheryl, which is a very famous book. It's also made into a movie with Reese Witherspoon, if I'm correct. This is my very ugly copy from the thrift store. And this is one of those books I went into without any expectations. I just saw it in the thrift store and I was like, oh, maybe that one is interesting, but I didn't know really anything about it. And it was actually so much better than I thought it would be. This is about a young woman, Cheryl. This is an autobiography, who decides to walk the Pacific Crest Trail in California at a moment that her life has completely fallen apart. I don't fully remember anymore what happened. I think she divorced or broke up with her boyfriend and got into alcohol or drugs a little bit too much. I'm not exactly sure anymore, but her life was not in a good place when she decided to walk this trail. And this book documents her time on the trail and is combined with flashbacks of everything that happened before she decided to walk the trail. And this trail is like intense. It's dangerous. You can actually freeze to death. There's wild animals. You're not sure if you're gonna find enough food on the way because every time it takes a long time to, come across inhabited places again. And she decides to walk this trail on her own without really any previous experience. She does some research beforehand, of course, but most of the things of surviving in nature she learns along the way. And I found it so interesting because you kind of learn along with her. And I just learned so many things I never knew. And also, I just loved the whole sort of catharsis that this journey brought her, which is, of course, the reason that many people walk a trail like this. Yeah, I don't know. I just found it a very inspiring and uplifting book. Also, because it just reminded me that there's a lot of places in the world still where the nature is still so wild and we can access it if we want to, which, was hopeful. The next book I would like to discuss is Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer. I think I've talked about this in a previous video as well, my YouTube video about my Bibles, because this is like a Bible if it was about nature. This is a collection of personal essays from Kimmerer steeped in indigenous knowledge because she has indigenous ancestry. And obviously, the indigenous people of America, they had a much different connection to nature than we do nowadays. They lived very much in harmony with nature, in a sort of symbiotic relationship of giving and taking, and seeing that nature is there for us, but we also have to be there for nature. And there's a lot of lessons in this book that actually made me cry for all that we have lost. And also how beautiful the connection between humans and nature could be if we just open our eyes a little bit to what we're doing. One of the most beautiful things from this book, I think I learned, is that in the indigenous language, and this is also true for some other languages, the things in nature are not described as objects, but as people. So if they would talk about a tree, they would talk about him or her. Like indigenous people see plants and trees and animals as their equals, like their brothers and sisters to live alongside. And that just really opened my eyes to the way we talk about these things in English or in my language, Dutch. We would always say it, like the tree is an it, it's not a him or her. But that really depersonalizes the tree and puts a distance between us and the tree, which makes it so much easier to cut down. But if you see the tree as a her or a him, and you have a connection to that tree, and you know that tree is an equal to you, who deserves to be here as much as we do, then you wouldn't cut it down so easily. See, I said it again. That's how our brains are wired. And there's just so many lessons in this book like that. She also talks a lot about her personal life and raising her two daughters to be connected with nature as she is. And this is just one of the most beautiful books I've ever read. It contains so much wisdom, and I think everyone should read it. It's both heartbreaking and hopeful, I would say. But yeah, if you want to see nature through different eyes, this is one of the best books to pick up to do so. Let's take a quick break from the books to talk about something else related to spring, and that is spring clothes. Because this video is kindly sponsored by Simpo Retro, and they allowed me to pick out a few pieces from their new spring summer collection. And let me tell you, I could not be happier because I don't know what it is, but lately I have been very drawn to more like minimalist clothes. The past few years, I've always dressed very maximalist, like I do a lot of layering, I wear a lot of jewelry, but lately, I don't know, I'm just not feeling that so much anymore. I feel more drawn to like simple silhouettes. I think it's also because it makes it so much less stressful in the morning to just put together a simple, sort of classy outfit than put together this super extra, layered, maximalist, interesting looking outfit. Like I sort of made peace with the idea I don't always have to look super interesting or artistic. Sometimes I can just wear nice pieces of clothing that sort of speak for themselves, and that's okay. So I don't know, I just noticed a difference on my Pinterest boards where I was much more drawn to more like sort of classic retro French style, more like Jane Birkin stuff, if you know what I mean. So I was over the moon with these pieces by Simple Retro. And I will show the outfits in a little outfit montage. And I will link all the pieces that I got below so you can check them out for yourself if you want to. So thank you so much, Simple Retro, for sponsoring this video, and cue the outfits.
She's my what? She's my what? What is she? She's my dominantly do what? She's my what? She's my dominantly do what? She's my what? She's my dominantly do.
Let's move to some fiction books for, switching it up. Let's move to some fiction books to switch it up a little. And the first one I would like to discuss is The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett, if that's how you pronounce this name. This is a very famous children's classic and it's much beloved all over the world. And for good reason, I would say. I absolutely love reading this as well. I didn't read this as a kid. I discovered it relatively late. I think I picked it up for the first time like a few years ago, but even then it made a very deep impression on me. This book is about Mary Lennox, who grows up in India with her parents. And after they pass away, she is sent to live with her uncle in the moors in the UK. He lives in this gloomy mansion and he's busy all the time, doesn't really have a lot of time for her, so she feels lonely. And then one day she becomes obsessed with this secret garden she discovers that is locked. And she's gonna try to find a way in and revive this secret garden. And what surprised me most is that this book is a lot about manifestation. So I did some research about the time in which this book was written, and apparently this was a time in which manifestation became really popular, which I didn't know. I really thought it was a thing that we talked about a lot in the past years, but apparently it's been around. And yeah, basically Mary discovers that she can change her life by thinking differently. She also befriends this young boy who lives close and he is super depressed. I forgot his name. But she teaches him the things she learned and sort of takes him into her secret garden and makes him a part of it. And I think they also befriend a bird. I'm not really sure. I don't fully remember. But I don't know. I just found this book very ahead of its time in the way it talks about certain things. Like, for instance, there's this passage. One of the new things people began to find out in the last century was that thoughts, just mere thoughts, are as powerful as electric batteries, as good for one as sunlight is, or as bad for one as poison. To let a sad thought or a bad one get into your mind is as dangerous as letting a scarlet fever germ get into your body. If you let it stay there after it has got in, you may never get over it as long as you live. Like, that is manifestation. I think this book is just a beautiful lesson in if you put good things out in the world, it will come back to you. Also, especially when it comes to taking care of the world around you and the nature around you. The next one I have here is The Offing by Benjamin Myers, and this was one of my favorite books of last year. This book takes place after the Second World War, and it follows Robert, who is this young guy who is coming of age, and he knows he has to start working soon, and it's sort of expected he starts working in the mines of his town where most young men work. But he decides he's not ready for that yet, so first he just wants to walk around England. He just starts walking one day. And during his walk, at some point, he comes across a cottage by the sea. And in this cottage lives Dulcie, an older woman who was sort of disappointed in life. She lived a very interesting life. She was like a socialite, moved around the art circles, but she's sort of mysterious. She doesn't talk a lot about the past. But she takes a liking to Robert and he can stay with her. He promises to fix up her garden, which is completely overgrown, in return for being allowed to sleep there. And Dolce sort of slowly introduces him to the small pleasures of life, like really good fresh foods, just cooking in general, taking a glass of wine by the sunset, getting to know plants and nature intimately. And this way, Robert discovers a completely new way of life beyond the one that he grew up in. Robert and Dolce form this really unlikely but very deep friendship. But under this all simmers this mystery surrounding Dolce that makes her a difficult person to deal with sometimes. And one day, Robert discovers why she is the way that she is. This book felt like one slow, languid summer day spent by the coast, lying down between the flowers. The lessons that Dolce teaches Robert are so beautiful, like the way you can look at the world and the way you can enjoy what nature gives us in such a deep, profound way. It just gave me such inner peace. This is just the perfect book to take with you on holiday, read it on a really warm, beautiful summer day, take it to the park, I don't know, and just really indulge in the beauty of this story. Next up, we have Northwoods by Danielle Mason. This was one of my other favorite books of last year. This book was so completely original. I had never read anything like it. Basically, the main character of this book is not people, but a place. This book begins in pilgrim times where a young couple runs away from their Puritan village and sort of start their own Eden by the lake in the Northwoods. They build a cottage there. This place becomes the main character of the story. You follow this place through the centuries that follow up until now, like our modern times, and all the people that inhabit it and the fragments of their lives. So it just takes a really interesting point of view on the places that we inhabit and how they never really belong to us, because there's so many people that came before us, so many people that will come after us, and they all put their stamp on the place and they all add to the history of the place. And most of all, like while people are just living their life, focusing on all their personal dramas and their problems, throughout that all, nature just continues doing its thing. It will just take its course, regardless of what people are going through, regardless of the choices they make. Nature will always take its course. And this book translated that so beautifully by taking time between certain chapters and, dedicating a chapter to zooming in on what was going on in nature at that moment. Like you just had the most tragic story of a family living in that house. And then suddenly the book would zoom in on like this wood beetle, for instance. I don't know if it was a wood beetle, but like an insect. And how they would start chewing on the wood, like deep down in the foundations of the house. And the people were, of course, completely oblivious to this. And it created this sort of like beautiful poetry between what nature does and what people do, and how these things sometimes come together, but often also live completely besides each other. I don't really know how to explain, but this book was just so unique, and the ending made me absolutely gasp. Definitely worth the read. I think this might be one of my favorite books of all time, actually. The last fiction book I have here is The Overstory by Richard Powers. And this is one of the books I have not finished yet. I'm almost halfway because this book was quite dense. I was struggling a little bit with getting through it at some points, but that does not mean it is not absolutely beautiful. So like Northwoods, this book is a little bit about the interplay between people and nature and how nature will always be around while humans might not be. So it sort of plays the human dramas against the backdrop of, eternal nature. And it starts with different stories of different people and their connection to certain elements of the world around us. And at first, I thought it was a short story collection, but now I've come to the point where the stories start to merge, which I'm very excited about because it just adds an extra layer to this book. And the writing of this book is very beautiful. I underlined a lot of passages, so I'll just read a random one to you that I found now. She takes his shaking hand in the dark. It feels good, like a root must feel when it finds, after centuries, another root to bleach to underground. There are 100,000 species of love, separately invented, each more ingenious than the last, and every one of them keeps making things. Another book I have not finished but I think is worth the mention is The Lost Art of Reading Nature's Signs by Tristan Cooley. I got this book for Christmas because, like I said before, I want to be more in touch with nature. And I just realized I don't know a whole lot about it. I know very basic things, but I would not be able to survive in the wild, let me tell you that. And this book sort of talks about all these things you need to know if you would have to survive in the wild. And I'm not planning to do that anytime soon, but I just find it interesting to know. There's just so much knowledge that humans used to have that we all have kind of collectively lost. And this book has collected some of that knowledge. So it's about how to find your way by reading the stars, and how can you find water in the wild, how can you track animals, and how do you recognize medicinal plants and poisonous plants. And I just find that really interesting. So I think if you want to know more about the basics of knowing nature and how to live with it instead of just opposite of it, I think this book is a good place to start. So I just wanted to mention it quickly. Then we have Upstream by Mary Oliver. I cannot make a video about nature and humans' connection to nature in books without mentioning Mary Oliver. She is the queen of this. You can also pick up any poetry collection by her, and it will talk about nature in such a profound and beautiful and intimate way. But Upstream must be one of my favorites. This is more of an essay collection in which she reflects on her connection to nature from childhood until now, and also how it reflects in her writing and the writing of others. She talks a lot about the poet Walt Whitman, I think. She tries to sort of decode the mysteries and beauty of the natural world through writing. This was just such a peaceful book with gorgeous prose. It's very inspiring also if you want to make art. She talks a lot about what forces to drive us to make art, and how this is sort of reflected in the natural world as well, because humans are so naturally driven to create. And I think my favorite part of this book is how Mary Oliver is very big on the whimsical and, embracing the whimsy within yourself and romanticizing your life and surroundings. And I live by that too. So I feel very connected to this book. The last book I would like to discuss is The Garden Against Time by Olivia Lang. First of all, this cover is so beautiful. It's one of my favorite covers that I own. If you don't know Olivia Lang, she's one of my favorite authors. She is a master at combining her own personal memories and experiences, which more like researched, informative essays in beautiful, beautiful writing. Her most famous book is The Lonely City, in which she talks about her loneliness while she lives in New York City and sort of tries to make sense of it through the art of four artists that also depict loneliness in their work a lot. And The Garden Against Time is part gardening diary, a little bit like Jarman's Mother Nature, and part exploration of why we humans feel so drawn to gardens and how we can make sense of humans' connection to nature in the light of gardens. But also, and this is what I find very interesting in light of what I talked about before, the privilege of gardens and having access to green spaces, because that's not a given, especially not now, but also in the past. A lot of the public gardens in UK and probably also around the rest of the world have a very violent history of oppression and slavery behind them. So Lang explores this history and this idea through different literary works, through artists, through other people in history that tended to their own garden, and she ruminates about all of this while she is creating a garden of her own and describes all the struggles that go into that as well. And I love this book. I found it so interesting. I particularly love learning about William Morris, which we mostly know from his patterns nowadays that you can buy as like wallpapers and stuff. But he was also a very avid gardener and almost like a philosopher on the topic of the beauty we need around us as people to feel good, which I found really interesting to read about. And there's just a lot of like new ideas in this book that I found worthy of exploring and just made me think a lot. And I love those kind of books. So this book was both very peaceful and very enlightening. And it really made me itch to plant some flowers of my own, which unfortunately I cannot do, but one day, one day. So those were all the books I wanted to talk about today. I hope it inspired you a little to read about nature as well, because I think the connection between us humans and nature is so interesting and something worth exploring, because we are separating ourselves from nature so much more every day. And I think that's a really big loss. And these books just really inspire me to, take a step back and smell the flowers, as they say. And I just know I'm going to devour these books again this summer. And there's so many more in this category that I have on my list. Like, I really want to read Pelgrim at Tinker's Creek by Annie Dillard, which is supposed to be really good. So maybe in a year I can make another one of these videos with new recommendations for you. If you have any for me, please let me know, because I'm always excited to discover more books in this genre. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this book-related video, and I will see you soon. Bye!